Welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection of humans and technology, as well as brain science, as well as lots of other fun things. With me, I have Dr. Susan Weinschenk. Hello.
Hello.
And I am Guthrie Weinschenk. So, what are we talking about today?
Well, I thought we might talk about driverless cars.
Okay.
And specifically about two things, I think. One is, how is it going to be that people are really get comfortable with not being in control of the car? And then I'm also interested in how people's behavior might change about renting versus owning cars, because I know that at the Computer Electronics Show this week, there's a lot of talk about partnerships between the driverless cars and mainstream car manufacturers and things like Uber and Lyft.
So, can I just say some?
Yeah, jump in.
Just some quick background information. You're not getting it this week, but this week was CES 2016, Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Traditionally the largest tech show in the world, though recently it hasn't been. It's just kind of become a who's who big party. And there's actually an interesting article you can read. I think it was either Ars Technica or The Verge. I think it was The Verge. That was basically said that CES is now just a car show, because all the tech, all the announcements were all car-based. And the biggest keynotes now, what used to be, Samsung releasing new phones. Well, Samsung does that on their own, at their own conferences, or at there's a big German cell phone conference that's pretty popular, I think, as well. But now the keynotes are Ford, or Qualcomm came out with a new chip, but it was for a car, and Nvidia came out with a new they call it a supercomputer in a car, which, and they have a bunch of random statistics like, has the power of 150 MacBook Pros, whatever that means. Computational power of 150 MacBook Pros. That's kind of a...
We used to care about horsepower.
Yeah, exactly.
Now we care about the power of 150 MacBook Pros.
But if anyone actually does want to kind of know how, I guess we should start with the whole idea of what a driver's car is, because NVIDIA had this whole keynote, and the reason that there's such an arms race right now and why driverless cars are so hot is because finally the hardware, the computational power has caught up basically caught up with what a combination of deep learning software, which I will also get to, and the computational power of just raw, gigaflops of processing power has kind of caught up to the place where now you can have a car drive by itself.
And of course, I'm interested in, the psychology of that.
So it's a combination of the two.
I'm ready for the driverless car, or so I say.
Let's start in the 1970s.
Yes.
I do believe flying cars, autonomous flying cars, were going to be at the year 2000.
Yeah, where are they?
Was that a real thing?
That there was, or that people thought there was?
People really thought year 2000, all the cars will drive themselves, and they'll be flying too, but they're.
Well, I don't know how
when
many
did the idea of driverless cars kind of come into existence? Because like the Jetsons, were like the Jetsons driving? I completely forget.
No, the Jetsons were not driving. I don't think. I may have to go back and look. I don't think the Jetsons were driving. I don't know how. I think it was. I'm not implying that I was around in the 70s.
I know you weren't.
Well, I might have been, but I don't know that people really, really believed that it was going to happen soon. That there would be And I don't think we thought of it as driverless cars. I think that what see I already said we. I think it was more thought of as little individual low flying airplanes. Um, and I don't know, I think the image was more that people were driving them. I think that there's been a very small number of people, me included, who've thought about, you know, driverless something or other. Or, I mean, the one, for a while in the early 2000s, there were experiments with cars, with materials you would put in the roadbed
Right.
that would then grab the wheels of the car and kind of turn it into a train.
Right. A train that but instead of a train car, it would just be your car.
Be your car, and you wouldn't be on tracks per se, but there was something in the roadbed that would steer your car, and I guess, but that wouldn't be on all roads. So the idea is you would get to a main highway, and then you could kind of stop driving, but then you'd get off the main highway and you'd have to be driving again. Um, but I think, my impression, and I could be wrong, I could have just been out of it, but my impression is that the speed with which the true driverless car as it is now, as it now exists, and seems to be coming to fruition, that seemed to happen really, really fast.
I was just going to say the exact same thing because I feel like driverless cars almost came out of nowhere. I know, a couple years ago, like 10 years ago, some Stanford team had built a robot that could like go without an operator at like 6 miles an hour. And
Yeah.
then you kind of heard, Google was trying something. And in about 5-6 years now, we have essentially fully autonomous vehicles that can drive at highway speeds. So, it has happened really, really quickly. So just a quick background before, because I like to get to the future with you, especially because right now, the emphasis has basically just been on the hardware.
Yeah.
Just, can we make a thing that works?
Yeah.
And so I definitely want to talk to you a lot about the psychology of it, and as we go into the future and people actually start interacting with driverless cars. So I'm going to stick on the hardware side for just a little bit. So I don't know if anyone out there actually knows how driverless cars work, and I will give you just a really, really quick. Again, go watch the NVIDIA keynote at CES for a really great explanation of it. But the way it works is you have sensors on the car that basically like radar or sonar that can kind of create a 3D picture of what's around the car. And in many ways, Google has kind of a project where you can use your phone to do that. There's a lot of different similar ways, but basically you send out a signal, a radio signal, and it bounces into stuff and comes back to the car, and the car's like, oh, okay, there's a something there. So it takes that raw data and it turns it into a picture of sorts. And then it takes that picture and it has to use basically image recognition software. So the same stuff, and this is why Google is doing such a good job and kind of traditionally Google was leading the way on car development, driverless car development. And they have billions of miles driven in California. They've been driving their driverless cars all over the place. And so once you have that picture, you need to use image recognition software. Really, really, really advanced image recognition software. And with that, you have a picture in front of you, right? Okay, this is a tree. That's another car. This is the road. That's a curb. This is a sign. What does the sign say? Where this is a person. He looks like he's going to cross the road. This is a green light. Okay? So you have to individually and correctly identify each thing in the picture. And then once the picture has a meaning, then you need to determine the next course of action for the vehicle. So if it's a sign that says, no turn on right, no turn on red, and it's a red light, the car understands, okay, I can't turn here. If there's a person that's on the sidewalk, the car needs to know, okay, this is a hazard. I need to make sure I don't hit this. It also needs to identify the road, so it knows, okay, I need to drive on this surface. So once it does that, you just have to do that a couple million times every second. And then you have a driverless car.
Yeah, this sounds like, yeah, sure, no problem. It sounds like this computer is a lot smarter than the computer I have underneath my desk.
It is and it isn't. It's smarter in different ways. And so one of the reasons NVIDIA, again, they came out with a platform, and it has a couple GPUs in it. I don't want to get too technical, but essentially you just need a different kind of computing power than you need for normal everyday tasks. So as we record this podcast, we're using CPU power because it's encoding the audio file into a compressed format. That's one type of processing power. But what you really need is you need to do lots and lots of things graphically simultaneously. And for that, you need graphic power. So that's the reason graphics cards are so great. And if you look at the top supercomputers in the world right now, they're not being made with CPUs anymore. They're being made with GPUs. They're being made with graphics cards because you can do all this parallel stuff at the same time. So it's a lot, but it's a different kind of calculation. So that's part one. The second part is really, 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 really advanced software. And that's where we should do a whole podcast, I think, on deep learning software, deep learning analysis, which is really cool.
We should. But I want to know if they can create, if the software engineers can create that kind of technology and that kind of software, why does my video editing software have to be so damn complicated?
So here's what happens. The way I'm going to summarize kind of the way they've done this car software to make it better and better and better. What they do is they have a bunch of supercomputers essentially, and they run a video feed, right? Here's the data that a car would be getting, right? And they have in the NVIDIA talk, they had an urban street, right? With lots of stuff going on.
Yeah.
You start with a basic kind of software design that says, look for this. I think this is what a car is. Okay? And then essentially the way deep learning works is you do it's basically software evolution. So run this same scene 1,000,000 times and make little changes in the parameters, right? So because you have to quickly figure out what's a car. Well, cars are mostly square shaped, right? So look for things that are mostly boxes. But what size? What the curve of something is? They're little tweaks. And so you run, you start with your base parameters, and then you just run 1,000,000 times each iteration, tweaking things just a little bit. And at the end of 1,000,000, you look back and you're like, it worked a little bit better when you said, look for this. And then you make that your base, and you run it 1,000,000,000 times. And then you look at it again. And
all right, let's talk about the.
Well, I'll sum up. The point is that with these supercomputers, they've been able to create really, really specific software. So with a lot of processing power, but also with just really, really with software that's very, very fine-tuned to do the specific tasks that a driverless car would need to do, they can have kind of the driverless car software work. And that's why it's so advanced, and also why your computer you're sitting at your desk would never be able to do such things. So.
Well, I'm gonna expect that it will shortly. Tell me about you've never been in a driverless car, have
I
you?
have not, and in fact, I live in Illinois, and they are, I believe, illegal in Illinois
Still illegal. Okay.
on public roads.
Well, eventually they won't be. So, do you really? I mean, first of all, I said I really want a driverless car. Do you really want a driverless car?
Yes, I am all in on. I
Okay.
would love to have one
So
and
now I
take a
want you
road
to
trip.
imagine that you're in the driverless car, and it's driving you to the grocery store or to on the highway to visit someone.
Hmm.
How do you think you're really going to feel
Well,
about the car being in control and you not being in control?
can I tell you a fun story?
Sure.
I have actually gone through this process.
But you said you weren't in a driverless car.
No, but I have gone through the psychological process of this thing
How?
in a way very few people have. This is a brilliant insight of mine. Okay.
Okay.
So, a number of years ago, I lived in Egypt for almost a year. I lived in Cairo.
Yeah.
And the way you get anywhere is you go by taxi cab.
I think I know where this is going.
You probably do. The streets, there really aren't any lanes. There are no traffic lights. There are no stop signs.
Yeah.
People just kind of drive.
Yeah.
So when you're on the highway in an ancient like 1980s like Soviet-made car with literally 10,000 bumps where it has been, you get in little crashes all the time.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, they use old soda bottles to store the car fluids. So you're in this car. There are no safety equipment at all. There's no crumple zones.
No airbags.
There's no airbags. There's no
Okay.
seatbelts. And so
Okay.
you're flying down this highway, weaving in and out of traffic.
Yeah.
And with reckless abandon.
And how did that feel, Guthrie?
You are terrified because you don't have any control of the situation. And so what you have to do,
Yeah.
and which is what I did, is you just take a deep breath. You kind of close your eyes, or, look at the floor, and you just kind of let it go and say, okay, the driver is in control of the vehicle.
Now,
And then it kind of works.
That might be, well, that's a little different. That actually should be more terrifying because it was a driver. And with a driverless car, I personally would trust the car more than I would the driver in Egypt. I know what you mean, actually. I hadn't made that connection because I've had a similar experience in India. Same kind of drive. In the U.S., if you've not been to one of these other countries where they have different road rules, I think you don't realize, the driving in the, because in the U.S. you can drive around Baltimore or Chicago, right? Or LA, and you'll say, oh, these crazy drivers, and, people aren't obeying the rules. But when you go to a part of the world where they have totally different rules or very few rules, it can be quite a shock. And I've done the same thing in India. They, drive very, very fast and no lanes. And I mean, there are lanes of traffic, but there are no lanes. And so
Yeah, exactly.
there's a lot of honking so that people know. The honking means I'm here, don't hit me. And it's very friendly. And, I remember driving, we must have been going 50, 60 miles an hour, and I could have put my finger out the window and touched the vehicles going by.
Right.
That's how close they were, even at high speed. So yeah, I guess so. Do you think when your first time in a driverless car, that's really out on the road, not just on a test area, that you'll be that, same kind of terrified?
Yes. I
right,
think
so
I
how
think
do
the first time
The first
you're
time
in a
it
car
was-
and you get on the highway
All right.
and
All
you
right.
get
So
going up to 70 and
And there's no one driving.
There's no one driving.
So how are we gonna deal with this?
Well, I think
is it just that people are gonna be terrified and
then they get over it?
Like the first time you rode in an airplane,
yes.
If you were an adult,
and then it doesn't crash and you feel better.
But there are people who are always terrified in an airplane and never get past that.
I bet you there will be a subset of people, probably very similar to the subset of people who are scared in airplanes. Well, maybe not, but will also be scared of driverless cars. Let's talk a little bit about the psychology of what it's actually going to look like on the inside, because a really, really big difference. And so California recently just passed some, or at least I don't know if they passed or suggested, and it's going to pass. I'm not quite sure what the status is, but pretty strict regulations when it comes to driverless cars. So, if you want to sell a driverless car in California, you have to register and do all this stuff. There has to be a steering wheel. You have to be able to take manual control over at any time.
Yeah, but that's actually a bad idea.
There are lots. So it's very controversial, but this is right. So Google's vision, and let's briefly name the players. You got Google, who's coming up with driverless cars. Tesla is working on driverless car technology, and in fact, they both already have working models. Uber, who's working on their own driverless cars, though Google is actually, I believe, the largest investor in Uber, so there's some crossover there. I believe it was Ford just this week announced a $500 million partnership, or it could have been Toyota. Ford or Toyota announced a $500 million partnership with Lyft, which is the Uber competitor, to come up with driverless car technology.
Ford, yeah.
So there are, and then there's some other smaller players that are kind of working in, and I'm sure all the major car companies are doing it. You can already get a Mercedes, right? Or a Corolla. There's a lot of different companies who offer this. You're driving down the highway and you're eating your burger, and you take a sip of coffee and you turn back and there's a semi is screeched to a hole in front of you. Your car will already stop for you.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these features. So let me ask.
You got to have the driverless car tech for it to know that you're about to hit something.
Well, let me ask a couple questions. Well, first of all, I don't agree with letting the human intervene. I think that 99 out of 100 times that's probably a bad idea.
So it just depends what it looks like on the inside. So what Google would like to have is kind of the Jetsons pod, right? Where it's like a dome and you're there and you're like playing games and like just hanging out. The state of California would like it to look like a normal car with a steering wheel where you sit strapped in the driver's seat, except you just don't touch the steering wheel.
Yeah, I want the Jetsons version. I definitely want to be able to swivel my seat around.
Well, we talk about mental models. I think that really changes.
Well, okay. So if you're going to talk about mental models, what we know about mental models is that if you're introducing a new conceptual model,
right?
So that's what the thing is. The mental model is what I have in my head. The conceptual model is the model that the device is presenting to me. And when you want to introduce a very new conceptual model, that's easier than introducing a conceptual model that's kind of new and kind of not. And the car falls into that in between, right? So, I mean, it looks kind of like a car, and I know it goes on the road. So I have a mental model of what a car is, and yet now there's some differences, and that's the hardest type of device to introduce, is when if it's almost exactly like the old conceptual model, then it's easy for me to just learn the one or two things that have changed. If it's brand new, like I've never seen anything like this, right, then it's relatively easy because I'm not trying to compare it with anything. But the hardest thing is when it's in that in-between state, which is what the cars will be. And we know that's really difficult. So in some ways it might be better to make it radically different so that when I look in the car, I go, whoa, I know this thing grows on the road, but it doesn't look anything like a car. And any of the normal ways that I'm used to interacting with a car once I'm on the inside, I'll just throw out the window. Oh, that's a funny metaphor. Because it obviously is so different.
Can I get your opinion on something?
Yes.
Talk to me about what your thoughts about the Tesla. So Tesla came out with an electric car, and basically the entire car, the part that moves, is all contained within a foot of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But what they did, they could have made a car that looks nothing like a car,
mm-hmm.
right? Because you don't have an engine, you don't
mm-hmm.
need the normal parts and
mm-hmm.
and fuel tank and stuff, because the battery's in the bottom of the car. But what they did was, instead of make something that was totally different, they just made a sedan, and they even put the front place where the engine would be. Right, but when you open it, it looks like you lift the hood of a normal car, but when you open it, it's just empty.
Right.
And they call it the frunk, the front trunk.
The front trunk. Yeah.
Right. So what are your thoughts about that? Because they could have done something different, but they chose to just stick. I mean, maybe it's different because literally you wouldn't normally open the roof of your car, or the hood
mm-hmm.
of your car anyways. Mm-hmm. So you don't even, you just assume there's something in there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the difference?
These are good questions. I don't know that I have the answer to them. My guess is that Tesla and other car manufacturers are thinking that people will accept these new vehicles if they are like the old vehicles.
Okay.
And they might be right, and they might be wrong. There is some research that shows that people are more accepting of the car being in control if the car talks to you in a human-like voice, and if the person who's teaching you how to use it refers to the car with a name.
Yeah.
Like, Michelle, or
I'm your driver, Michelle. Yes. Where are you going today?
Yes, that people are more willing to give the car control, are less likely, and this is done in simulations, but are less likely to, but fairly complex ones, less likely to take a manual control away if there's a problem, if the car has talked to them in a human voice and it has a name. Which reminds me then of something else I wanted to mention, which is this idea, that you mentioned about Ford and Lyft. So we have these, the model of the business model and the psychology model about taxis has now mm-hmm. been totally disrupted, right? And people prefer and a lot of people seem to really like the idea of, being able to, instead of going out on the street and hailing a taxi, being able to use their smartphone. And I think this is because it's personalized. Okay. If I go out on the street and hail a taxi, it's very anonymous, and how long is it going to take me to hail one, and I don't have the information. And if I can use my phone and just dial, arrange for my personal car and driver to show up, right? And that seems much more personal.
And they've simplified the payment process.
And that's a very big deal, simplifying the payment process.
No tips included. Yeah, it's a big
deal. Yeah, very big deal. So that whole thing has changed. So some people think that the big change with, the big acceptance of the driverless car will not necessarily be that I'm going to go buy a car and I'm going to buy a driverless car, but that we will actually shift to more and more people not even owning a car, that the driverless cars are so available as the Uber or Lyft model that I don't need a car, because I'm just gonna, whether I just need a car to go to work, or I need a car to go to the grocery store, or I need a vehicle to go on vacation with my family.
Right.
I will just do the Lyft kind of thing, and arrange for one and order one, and it will just show up without a driver, um, at my door, and I can therefore customize, the vehicle I want for the journey I'm going on. I just need a really something small, where it'll be easy to find a parking space because I'm going out to dinner with my friends in the city.
Well, let's stop
versus
there.
I want
You don't need a
versus
parking space.
You're right. I don't need a parking
The
space.
car
Why did I
goes
say that?
and parks in the
That's right.
burbs and
But
then picks you up
maybe
at
I
when you
just
want.
want a little one because the little ones are cheaper because I don't use much
Sure.
gas. Versus I'm taking my whole family, on a 2-week trip out west, and I want the luxury van, with the tables
Ooh.
and the swivel chairs and all of that. And so then people will actually not, and the car companies believe this enough. I mean, the car companies it have really impressed me because, normally American car companies are not the first ones to embrace new stuff, and they tend to lag behind and almost die because they haven't caught up to what everyone wants. And now they're saying, we don't want to be surprised by a disruptive business and technology model. And so we're going to jump in. And they're saying people are going to stop buying cars.
So let's talk about ways that driverless cars disrupt or create giant paradigm shifts
Yeah.
in markets. All right? I'm just going to make a list.
Yeah.
List number one, or part number one, the taxis. Currently, the biggest headache for Uber
Is the drivers.
is people.
Right.
Uber is a brilliant and ruthless company.
Right.
They don't really like people very much, and that's fine.
Right.
So their dream is you just get rid of all the drivers, and you have driverless cars. You can run, 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
And you have your own fleet.
Yep.
So the whole taxi paradigm completely changes. That's one.
Yeah.
Second, the second big change is parking.
Yeah.
Right now, I live in Chicago. Parking downtown is how much a day?
Depends on where you park, but it usually, at least 24. And if you're
US
in a
dollars.
garage, it's going to be 50.
Sure. So, and the simple reason for that is that there's not enough room downtown. Why,
Right.
It's expensive. Much more profitable to have a giant office building than a parking garage.
Right.
Well, you have a driverless car. You get in your car. It drives you to, to where you want to go. And then, after it drops you off, it goes, maybe not all the way back to the burbs, but, out a mile to the giant automatic parking warehouse where it parks for, $1, someplace where there's much more room. And then when you're ready to leave, you press a button on your phone, your car comes and picks you up and drives you back. So it changes the whole idea of parking because you don't have to have the car right next to you when you get done with your activity.
Okay, well,
because it'll come pick you up.
Or.
Well, I'm getting there.
All right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it changes parking.
Yeah.
The biggest way it changes, and this is in my opinion, is the whole goods transportation industry.
Yeah.
This is such a huge deal. Amazon is gonna love this.
Right, because now you can drive.
Yeah, I need to get from the docks in Los Angeles to the
Wait a minute,
warehouse.
but there aren't driverless trucks yet, are they? No, there are. There are. I remember this now. There's entire convoys of driverless trucks.
There are. Well, first of all, if you can make a driverless car, you can make a driverless truck.
Yeah.
And in fact, the funny part is, it's actually much easier to make a driverless truck in some ways than a driverless car, because highways are actually much easier to do. Well, in some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. But in a city, you have a lot more to worry about.
Yeah.
When you're on an expressway,
Right.
there's a lot. You have to worry about things quicker because you're at a higher rate of speed.
But there's
But
less things.
the potential for bikers to be weaving in and out of lanes and
pedestrians
and that kind of stuff, you don't have to worry about. But that aside, the big dream for all the freight companies is, again, get rid of the truck drivers, which are unsafe, and legally they can only drive a certain number of hours before they have to rest. You've got all these problems. So what you do is you just have a whole fleet of autonomous truck vehicles. They can run, again, 20 hours a day. They just, back and forth. And then you kind of extend that into the city. Why can't I get my packages delivered any day of the week, right? You just have a fleet. You put it in the UPS truck. It goes and delivers your packages. So you have the whole shipping and transportation, which is going to get completely revitalized.
Yeah.
So
these are big things.
These are huge disruptive things. And then, of course, the question, will people stop buying cars? I am not entirely sure about that. It is possible that they will go to a simple rent model. Or I could see a subscription model. That makes sense to me. So the Netflix of cars.
Yeah.
You pay,
$20 a month.
Yeah, you pay $20 a month, and anytime you need a car, you press the button and a car shows up, and then it drives you to wherever you need to go. The cool thing is that, of course, it's not city limited. So if I'm in Chicago and I want to say I want to drive to Wisconsin, the car can just drive you to Wisconsin. There's no reason it couldn't, because once you get out of the car, it can drive itself back, or it can be used in Wisconsin for a while, So there's no, think of U-Hauls.
Yeah.
U-Hauls does this business model. Every U-Haul has like the different state, right?
Yeah.
And it's always, so U-Haul, they know that, well, you're driving from one part of the country to the other. So it's silly to have the U-Haul only stay in one specific spot. So you just create a nationwide kind of system, and then the U-Haul just goes wherever it is, and you just make kind of endless one-way trips.
Yeah.
And so you can have that model with cars. But
You don't think so?
I could see subscription. I could see groups of people kind of getting together.
But you think that... All right, do you think... how in the U.S., at least, a lot of people are deciding not to have a car and to use Uber and Lyft if they live in an urban area, especially. But there's still a lot of people that, decide, okay, I'm going to have my own car.
Right.
So do you think it's going to be like that where, okay, there might be increasing numbers of people who decide to not have their own car? Or do you think it'll be a big shift and a significant number of people who today would want to buy their own car would now choose not to?
Let's talk about electric drills.
Okay, why? Is there a reason?
Because the electric drill industry very much mirrors this exact same thing. On average, the average person, almost every household has some sort of electronic drill.
Yes.
And on average, that household will use it a couple times a year.
Yes.
So the whole drill industry is basically based on the fact that everyone needs one, but is not going to use it very often. But when you need it, you need it.
Yes.
So, and that the same is true of cars. The vast majority of time, I think people only drive their cars 10% of the time.
But they use their cars more than they use their drills.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of people use their car every day.
So I think it's a two-part question. I think to some extent, yes. So if you're living in a city and it's inconvenient to park anyways, and there's public transportation and there's all kinds of lifts and all kinds of stuff like that, and you were thinking about not having a car anyways, you'll probably lean towards not having it or doing a subscription service. Yeah. And there are models in cities in place already for these types of people where you can go and rent a car for the weekend, or just get groceries, whatever you need one for. So that's part one. I think I could see people buying less cars. So think of a family of 4 in kind of a rural or suburban area.
That's very interesting.
Right?
Yeah,
so the mom's got a car, the dad's got a car, the kid's in high school, so the kid's got a crappy car that they drive around. Everyone's got a car. And I could see instead of that, well, everyone doesn't need a car because
you have one car and then everybody else.
Yeah, you don't need to take, Tim to soccer practice because he picks up the husband from work, and then it gets Tim and gets him to soccer practice, and then it gets the groceries right. So you need less cars. So there's that. But I think you're talking about a culture shift.
Yeah, because people like their cars.
People like cars. They like to decide what car they have.
Do you know that 2015 is in the U.S. is the largest car sales year on record?
I do.
The second highest was in the year 2000.
Yeah. People are buying cars like crazy. Which and just quick econ point, it's mostly because of pent up demand from the recession, where everyone was waiting to get rid of their old cars, and now.
Right.
Okay,
I figured.
Yeah.
Well, this will be interesting. This is going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, and it'll be interesting to see if, 10 years from now, when we're listening back to these old podcasts we did, we just shake our heads and say.
So can I ask you some questions?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Question number 1.
Yeah.
Do you think that the kind of psychological problems with these cars will disappear over time? And because right now it's just kind of a function of safety and trust.
Yeah.
Do you think that in a while people will just...
I think it's going to be generational.
Okay. Question number 2. Finish.
I think the people for whom this is new, who grew up with driver cars, I think a small percentage of them will come to trust it and get used to it, and a fairly significant percentage will never really be quite comfortable. I think people in that are younger that learn how to drive a driver car, but didn't do it for the last 60 years, will more easily trust. And then obviously the people who grow up riding in driverless cars will have no problem at all. So eventually, I believe the trust issue will eventually be gone.
Because I think the future is for cars to be pods. And not look like cars of their present container.
I absolutely agree with you.
I think that the constraint is a safety constraint. And so once the software and hardware, they will do continuous improvement to the point where there are, where it's very, 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 very safe.
The safety and
much safer than any human could ever drive a car.
And the trust factor.
Then I think.
So we're talking
because there's regulatory stuff too, and that's the biggest hurdle.
Yeah, that's actually a whole nother thing that I don't want to get into right now, because we could probably do a whole podcast on that. But yeah, so I'm thinking, the cars may be out in 5 years, but it may be a good 20 to 30 years before people there's a generation of people that are totally comfortable with them.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
Pick the year.
Yeah.
When in the majority of states, it will be illegal to drive a car.
In the U.S.
Yes, and so you will have to use a driverless car. No one would actually have a person drive a car. That's crazy unsafe.
2026.
Okay. Pick the year in which the majority of states in which it will be legal to have a driverless car on the road.
Where it will be legal?
Yes, because currently it is illegal in almost all states.
2020.
2020.
Mm-hmm.
Fully driverless. Yeah, there's different classifications for driverless.
No, I meant fully.
Yeah,
I meant fully. With no one's driving, no one's at the helm, no one's in control.
Okay. All right. And then. Do you think this will spread towards very interesting platforms? So right now, the whole idea of a car is based on the fact that someone has to be driving and someone needs to go somewhere. And generally, the size of people that fit in a single, thing, 4, 6, maybe 8 if you have a big, minivan or something. That's the size of a car. Once you have driverless cars, the whole paradigm changes. So do you think we'll be seeing changes in the size of cars? So, for example, will we start seeing a lot more 2-seaters? Or conversely, will we start seeing, if we do have kind of like the Netflix of cars, are you going to start to see like larger bus size autonomous vehicles?
Definitely. I think we're going to end up with like customized, mass transit where the bus pulls up and picks you up, but it's based on, where you said you wanted to go. So I think that we're going to, so it ends up, it has, 12, 15 people in the vehicle and then makes its own route and drops people off. I think, I think we're going to have everything from a single person up to, let's say a large van size.
And I'll make a quick caveat here.
Yeah.
You can't do any of this stuff unless the thing is electric. If you if you still have a gasoline-based engine and fuel system and gasoline tank, then it has to be in the shape of a car for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So, we're assuming that gasoline cars have disappeared and now everything's electric powered because you can be a lot more flexible because the engine of an electric car is only about the size of a watermelon, and then you just got to store the battery somewhere.
Well, I can just tell you that I hope this happens soon because I have 2 cars right now.
Yeah.
One is let's see, 18 years old and has 180,000 miles on it.
Sure.
And the other one is not much better at 14 years old with about 170,000 miles on it. So, and I'm trying to, my dream is to have these hold on until I can buy a driverless car. I don't think I'm going to make it.
I think, well, can I offer a thought?
Yeah.
So the very interesting thing about driverless cars is that, cars these days now can get software updates. It changes the whole car manufacturing model because in the past, a car was like a toaster. Once it's out,
that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
It dies, yeah.
And that's really
now, you're not saying that my 18-year-old car can get a software update.
No, but
I don't even know if it has software.
It actually does.
My 18-year-old car?
Yep.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, I know the car to which you're referring.
You're saying
most cars have onboard computers that do lots of stuff.
You're saying if I bought a newer car now, it could possibly be turned into a driverless car?
It has to be the right one. So, for example, Tesla, they had cars out. And then I think like a year ago, they said, oh, by the way, all your cars actually have driverless capability. We just haven't turned it on.
Okay, but if I'm going to buy a Tesla, I think I'm going to have to make some more money.
Well, or just wait a couple of years until they come out with the mass market model.
All right. Hey, this has been fun. And I hope one day I come pick you up and take you out to dinner without driving.
Well, I mean, look, I can't wait for driverless cars. This summer, I took a 5,000-mile trip to Canada.
And somebody had to drive.
It was 6 days of driving, and it was fun. But I can't. It would have been wonderful just to kind of hit the
Kick
button
back
and
and relax, take a nap.
We drove through Montana. There's
Watch
just
a
nothing there for
movie.
miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. Could have driven through the night. We would have gotten there in half the time.
It's true.
So, anyways, this has been fun, and hopefully you guys have some interesting thoughts about driverless cars. Again, you can email us at info@theteamw.com. We're also our website's www.theteamw.com. We're also on Facebook, YouTube, all kinds of fun stuff. So you can find us there, and please subscribe, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks so much for listening to Human Tech.